Press the blue got it button, Linda.
What?
Press the blue got it button.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
You're
Perfect.
welcome.
All right. Here we go. We're gonna continue on from where we left off last time. Kind of what we mentioned in just this little, very different writing style than before. We're gonna read through a whole section and then go back and pick it apart as we normally do. So last week we read through the first section of the introduction, awe and surrendering to it, and then we left off on page 9. So we'll pick up on page 9, continuing to dissect. And before we get started, does anybody have anything that they want to pick up from last week? Anything you've been thinking about? Any issues, concerns, or rebuttals? I am honoring the silence. I am honoring the silence. Going once. Oh, great. So let's start on page 9. And we actually got through, let's see, where do we get to? Actually, we're starting on page 8. I take that back, page 8. We completed the first complete paragraph on page 8. And maybe let's start there. Let's start at the top of page 8. We'll just read through just to get a running start at the new material. Contemplation allows us to see the truth of things in their wholeness. And I guess maybe to back up a little bit, he is making the case now that in order to establish a contemplative way of life, a contemplative practice in our lives, we have to get to the point where we can see the world with awe again, let it stun us, and then surrender to it. And so that is a process that he's talking about. As long as we are running so fast and operating on everything that we think we know, all the beliefs and thought patterns that we have established in life, we're never really seeing anything new. And life loses the ability to surprise us, loses the ability to break through that crust, that filter, and actually stun us into silence again. He says, without that process, we don't really see what's going on. All right? But contemplation is the antidote. Contemplation is the way to reestablish what we've been calling beginner's mind, to reestablish the ability to see things as if they are new again. So at that first paragraph on page 8, contemplation allows us to see the truth of things in their wholeness. It is a mental discipline and gift that detaches us, even neurologically, from our addiction to our habitual way of thinking, and from our left brain, which likes to think it is in control. We stop believing our little binary minds, which strips things down to 2 choices and then usually identifies with one of them, and begin to recognize that the inadequacy of that limited way of knowing reality. In fact, a binary mind is a recipe for superficiality, if not silliness. And that's the line that William said that I skipped over and wanted to come back and really jump on. A binary mind, one that is dualistic, one that just sees what ones and zeros, right? Black and white, on or off, is a recipe for superficiality, if not silliness. We never can go deep. I don't know if y'all remember from Richard Rohr's book, Everything Belongs. Introduction to that book, he talked about the circumference and the center, right? He said most of us live on the circumference of life, on the surface of it, but we never take the dive into the center. He's saying basically the same thing again. The reason that we live on the circumference of life is because we are thinking dualistically. We are thinking in terms of binary. It's either this or that. We never allow the paradoxes of life to do their work in us, which will drive us into the center, which will take us down beneath the superficiality. It is only with wrestling with the paradoxes of life that we actually break through. Why did Jacob have to wrestle with God all night long and get wounded in the thigh before his name got changed to Israel? It's the same concept here. As long as we just make a mental decision to click to one side or another, switch our uniform, then nothing really changes, and we stay on that superficial surface. But when we don't allow ourselves to fall into that trap, and we will let the horns of the paradox stand and continue to vibrate in that sacred tension in the middle, that's when the deeper processes actually take place. So this is the kind of thing he's talking about. Did I just completely muddy the waters, or does that make a certain kind of sense?
I just think there's more.
All right, so we continue. Only the contemplative or the deeply intuitive can start venturing out into much broader and more open-ended horizons. This is probably why Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. So now new territory. But how do we learn this contemplative mind? This deep, mysterious, and life-giving way of seeing, of being with reality? Why does it not come naturally to us? Actually, it does come momentarily in states of great love and great suffering. But such wide-eyed seeing normally does not last. We return quickly to dualistic analysis and use our judgments to retake control. A prayer practice, contemplation, is simply a way of maintaining the fruits of great love and great suffering over the long haul and in different situations. And that takes a lot of practice. In fact, our whole life becomes one continual practice. And that would be moving toward unity of consciousness. Actually, did we read that last week?
I think we did.
That sounds really okay. So then we're starting with the new material now. Forget what I said before. All right. To begin to see with new eyes, we must observe. I think we read this too, and usually be humiliated by the habitual way we encounter each and every moment. It is humiliating because we will see that we are well practiced in just a few predictable responses. Few of our responses are original, fresh, or naturally respectful of what is right in front of us. The most common human responses to a new moment are mistrust, cynicism, fear, knee-jerk reactions, a spirit of dismissal, and overriding judgmentalism. It is so discouraging when we have the courage to finally see that these are the common ways that the ego tries to be in control of the data instead of allowing the moment to get some control over us and teach us something new. Yes, we did read that, because then we talked about the fact that I wasn't seeing it so much as humiliating and discouraging, but as an evolutionary adaptation that our mindset made that allow us to be able to survive better. So we talked through all of that, right? Okay.
Yep.
Now, forget all I said there and start now.
Starting now.
Starting now. To let the moment teach us, we must allow ourselves to at least be slightly stunned by it until it draws us inward and upward toward a subtle experience of wonder. We normally need a single moment of gratuitous awe to get us started. And such moments are the only solid foundation for the entire religious instinct and journey. So what he's talking about here, of course, is beginner's mind, right? To let the moment teach us, we must allow ourselves to be at least slightly stunned by it until it draws us inward and upward. For the subtle experience of wonder, we normally need a single moment of gratuitous awe. So this beginner's mind, he's saying, starts with some breakthrough, some intense event or experience, something that can break us through. It hits us in such a way, maybe blindsides us in such a way that for a moment, we forget what we know. We forget who we think we are. We forget all those things that have kept life in place and allow us just to be. Something just came to mind. This evening, I went into my son's room, and we were going to talk about what we're going to do about dinner. And of course, our little dog, the little Chiweasel, right, runs in behind me into his room. Now, my son has a cat in there, and the cat just stays in his room all the time, but the cat was nowhere to be found. So the dog walks in, and then the cat saunters out when the dog had its back turned. And then the dog turns around and starts walking back toward me, sees the cat out of the peripheral, and just freaks out and starts running but it's a hardwood floor. So the dog was literally running for about a second before he finally got traction enough to actually move. It's like one of those cartoons. It was the funniest thing in the world. But the dog was stunned by something that it didn't see coming. And just to see the cat in the peripheral, all of a sudden, bam. You know, we've all had that experience where something just strikes us in such a way that all of a sudden it's like we're taken out of ourselves. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Think about it. Have you had an experience like that? Was it maybe that you walked outside and you saw a sunset and the colors just kind of blew you away, and for a moment you're just kind of standing there with your mouth slightly open and you're just looking? Was it, I don't know, maybe it was a sporting event and you see a play that you just can't even quite comprehend that this person did that, or a musical concert, or ballet, could be anything. Maybe some of those gymnasts that you see doing impossible things and you just like in awe and amazed. It could be your grandchildren, it could be anything. But can you think of a moment like that that just in that instant took you out of yourself? Say it out
My son
loud.
being born.
What's that, Scotty?
The day my son was born. And my
All
daughter,
right.
for that matter. I was there
Uh-huh.
to deliver both those babies, and that takes your mind off a lot of things.
And the other?
And what?
He asked if there was any other people that wanted to share it. And
A couple of
Really, you
days
guys
ago,
don't have oh, go ahead, William.
I was heading to the pharmacy a few days ago, and I don't know why I decided to walk up the middle of the street instead of walking on the sidewalks. But I mean, there were no cars coming, of course, but just having a new perspective where, like, when I'm walking up the middle of the street, like I can see all the way down, probably a good mile and a half ahead. Whereas you don't have that view on the sidewalk. And that was kind of cool in the moment.
I have a
William's
weird one.
story.
I've
Go
got a
ahead,
weird
Kathy.
one. I was walking on the path at the beach down by where I live. This was a few weeks back, and it was early in the morning. It was like 7:30, so not a lot of people are out yet, mostly the surfers and then just sort of the hard enthusiasts that are out there with their walking shoes and everything and walking. And comes towards me is this guy dressed like a stormtrooper. At like 7:30 in the morning, he's just walking the path. It wasn't like a power walk. He was just walking, and I just stopped in my shoes and stared at him for a second and went, okay. And he just walked by. I just thought that was very strange. I didn't ask him what he was doing. And it's like he was dressed up, but nobody was there to really see him. He was just walking along the path. I
You
thought,
mean
am
like
I
a,
in a Star Wars movie or
I was
something?
gonna
That was
say, are
weird.
you a Star Wars stormtrooper with
It
the
was a
white?
Star Wars stormtrooper
Okay.
outfit.
Yeah,
Weird.
that would
That
stop
was
me.
weird. It just caught me off guard. And I was like, okay, I didn't expect that.
Did you have a
William,
religious experience because of that?
I didn't. I should have said something clever and asked him, but I didn't have time. He walked by and I thought about turning around and saying something, but he just didn't look like he was going to talk or anything. And he just was like sort of walking, sauntering by. And okay, there
you
was
have a
no
problem with
parade in
that,
town. It
Kathy?
was, what's that?
You got a problem with that?
Of course not. I'm very non-judgmental. I'm okay with stormtroopers.
William's story reminded me, Dave, of the one you talk about where your son's in the little push cart and bushes are growing up to a certain height and how you see things from his height. It reminded me of that when William was talking about walking up the middle of the street and seeing things from a different point of view.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. And what he's talking about, I was just pushing my Brennan when he was 1.5 or so in a stroller on a hiking trail. And there was mustard grass that had grown up, so it was probably about head high to me, and the path narrowed, and so I was pushing through the mustard grass, and he got really quiet, really silent, and all of a sudden it struck me what does that look like from his point of view, right? Just 2.5 feet off the ground. And so I lowered my head down and I'm pushing the stroller like this. So my head was even with his. And suddenly the whole scene was transformed. You know, we were like out in the middle of the forest and these huge trees were towering above our heads. And you could imagine it being like Middle Earth or something. It was just completely changed. So that moment, yes, completely changed my perspective. Those are the kind of moments we're talking about. I know that you've had them. Somewhere between the birth of a child and a stormtrooper from Star Wars, you've had these kind of experiences that just take you out of yourself, even just for a moment. You know, and it can be something like a sunrise, or it could be anything really.
That was a stormtrooper from Carlsbad, right?
Oh, okay.
I'll share one.
Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, music can do that for me sometimes. I mean, all the times I can get lost in music, but years and years ago, before they were huge, we got to sit 6 rows from the front for Alison Krauss and Union Station. And Alison Krauss has won more Grammys than any performer because she's in the niche of bluegrass music. And they're all it's all acoustic, right? And they've got the amps and everything because it's acoustic, but there aren't more than 1,000 people in the entire amphitheater. It's an outdoor amphitheater at the Minnesota Zoo, and they were performing in front of just 1,000 people, and we got there super early, got 6 rows in front, and of course I'd memorized every word, every song they were singing, right? But I was lost because it was like they surrounded me and they were singing just to me. You know what I mean? And I was just lost in the ethereal beauty of the acoustics, you know, and the music. They just play so beautifully. And the singing, yes, but their acoustic work is amazing, and her violin work is amazing. And I just got lost in it, and I'll never forget that. It's still one of my highlights musically in my whole life, was just to be that close to it. You know what I mean? And most of the sound is not coming from the amps for me. It's coming from right there, you know, on the stage. So, yeah. So that's mine.
A big groupie.
Yeah, well, I'm a big groupie for more than her, you know,
Yeah.
But I just, when you get somebody, when you can get that close to somebody that's that good doing music, and the music is that high level, and you're that physically close, that's just something to that, you know.
You're not.
So the next thing to think about is, because he starts this off by saying, to let the moment teach us, right? Going back, he says, it's discouraging when we have the courage to finally see that these are the common ways the ego tries to be in control of the data, instead of allowing the moment to get some control over us and teach us something new. Now, to let the moment teach us, we must allow ourselves to at least be slightly stunned by it until it draws us inward and upward. So now the question is, when you have a moment like that, what is it teaching you? Now, I don't know what the Star Wars man can teach us, but Kathy will have to work that out for herself. But as far as the birth of a child, or seeing something with a new perspective, in the way that William, for inexplicable reasons, is walking down the middle of the street, or me pushing my small son, you know, that change in perspective, you know, that new life coming into the world can certainly teach us something, and can become a touchstone for us going forward, to come back and find more and more meaning in subsequent moments. But we have to first be open to it. We have to be broken through to it. We have to see it as it is, rather than just through the filter of what we already think we know. And so this is important, to start not only recognizing when those moments do strike us, but also to start to cultivate moments like that, to realize that the moment doesn't have to be intense for us to be stunned by it. It doesn't have to be some really great life-altering event in order for it to teach us something. We just have to be present to the moment in order for it to both stun us and awe us and teach us something. And that's what contemplation is about, to develop this new habitual way of seeing that allows us to be stunned But what otherwise would be perceived as mundane and ordinary events that we just kind of step over to go to someplace important. So we're trying to change that around. This is all Brother Lawrence stuff, right? You can see God when you turn the cake that is frying in the pan and you pick up the piece of straw off the ground. That's classic Brother Lawrence. He created that, turned that into an art form. That's what we're being asked to do in contemplation, is to be able to see with that kind of non-biased clarity, I suppose. Now, Rohr says, we normally need a single moment of gratuitous awe to get us started, and such moments are the only solid foundation for the entire religious instinct and journey. That's a huge statement, right? These little moments of gratuitous awe are the solid foundation for the entire religious instinct and journey. So he says, look, for example, at the Judeo-Christian Exodus narrative. It all begins with a murderer, Moses. And you know the story, right? Moses as the prince of Egypt, and he comes across a Egyptian guard who is beating a Jewish slave, a Hebrew slave, and he steps in, intervenes, and kills the guard. So a murderer, Moses, on the run from the law, encountering a paradoxical bush, there's that paradox, that burns without being consumed. Struck by awe, he takes off his shoes, and the very earth beneath his feet becomes holy ground, because he has met being itself. This narrative reveals the classic pattern, repeated in different forms in the varied lives and vocabulary of all the world's mystics. Okay, so there's the burning bush. Now, it wasn't so much that burning bushes were so unique. We would think so, but there are creosote bushes in the desert that can sometimes self-ignite, or it takes really nothing to get them burning. But this one was burning without being consumed, which means he had to more than just glance at it and keep on his way. He had to consider it long enough to realize there was something different about this wood. And Moses had spent 40 years out in the back of beyond with Jethro and living with the Midianites and shepherding. So months at a time out with the flocks in silence, developing what many have called a shepherd's consciousness. So he had learned this new way of seeing through all of this silence and solitude that he had experienced in a lifetime, 40 years. Moses' life is divided into 3 sets of 40. 40 as the prince of Egypt, then 40 in exile in the Midian, and then 40 leading the Israelites to the promised land. And so in the second 40, he develops his consciousness, and he can see something and be awed by it in a way that many would just have walked on past. So this is what we're being asked to do in contemplation. It's a new way of seeing. And can something that seems so mundane actually shock you? I remember a time, this is 30 some years ago, when I was practically living up at Sarah Retreat in Malibu. And I might have told some of you this story. But what I would do is I just go and book a room. There wouldn't be a retreat going on. If I had a few days where I could get away, I just go get a room and I just stay and I just do my own thing, you know, and just stay on the grounds and meditate and read. And I get appointments with the priests there and talk to them. And then at night, I'd always go for a run. And so Sarah is at the back of Malibu Canyon. It occupies a hill at the back. And so I run down the hill and then run through the streets of Malibu Canyon that goes all the way out to PCH, and then the water is there. And you're running by in the night, and of course the house lights are on, and you look in these houses and says, who gets to live here? You know, what kind of people get to live here in Malibu Canyon? But I was running, and it was one of those nights where I could swear that if I turned my head quick enough, I'd see the Lord running next to me, you know? I could just catch him unawares, I could see it. And I remember when I was coming back, and I was coming back up the hill to the retreat center, there was a full moon, and it was just burning there in the sky. It was so bright. And I stopped and I was just looking at it, and I just burst into laughter. It was the weirdest thing. It was uncontrolled. I just started laughing. I don't know if any of you have heard about holy laughter in charismatic circles. It's there's speaking in tongues, there's holy laughter, there's getting slain in the spirit, there's all kinds of different ways where we are just kind of so in the spirit that we lose certain control over ourselves. And I'd never experienced that before, just bursting into laughter. And I just stood there looking at that moon like an idiot. And I was glad that there was probably, of course, I didn't care in the moment, but later, I'm pretty glad there was no one there to see me doing that. But it was just that moment. It was just a full moon. I've seen that every month, for at that time, about 32, 33 years. And here I was just laughing at the moon. But it was one of those moments where at that point, I had practiced enough contemplation. At that stay in the retreat, I had been practicing enough silence, right? But that moment just broke through in a way that had not happened before. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about. If we become silent enough, if we practice enough silence and presence, then moments can break through that are not intense or spectacular at all, but they're going to have the same effect as if they were, like some of these moments that we were just talking about. That's the kind of shepherd's consciousness that we're trying to develop as we move into contemplative practice. Making sense?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I
All right.
have an experience that I'd like
Go,
to
John.
share briefly. I experienced the birth of my son, and many years ago, and about, I want to say, about 20 years ago, he had come out to California to visit me for a long weekend, and we had been somewhat estranged for a few years. We didn't talk much or anything, and he finally called me, and I said, Bubby, get out here, come and see me. I want to put my hands on you. And we were having a conversation. I was just he and I, and we went. I took him to dinner at like El Torito, someplace down the harbor, and I leaned across the booth at him, and I said, you know something? I said, I want to share something with you. I said, from the minute I saw the top of your head, before you came out of your mother, I saw the top of your head, and then I watched you being born. And I said, from that moment to this day, I have never drawn a breath that I didn't love you. And we both stopped for a minute. I think probably, well, I can only speak for myself, but the enormity of that moment was huge for me. It's a great expression of love, and on page 9 where it said, we normally need a single moment of gratuitous awe to get us started, and that's what brought that memory up to me. I was awestruck and able to share that with him and to broaden that perspective. And I shared it again with him recently when we were visiting them in Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and we both kind of had a good little chuckle about it. It was nice.
Hmm. Nice.
That's great, John. Great.
It made me think of simpler things than some of these big moments. Like we were talking about just having a shift in perspective, right? When you're walking in the middle of the street or something like that. But like in a conversation where somebody shares something that just momentarily expands your worldview, your perspective, or something like that. It's like a moment where you're moving beyond what you think and know to connect or expand or something. And that seems like it could be, a mini moment of
No, absolutely, William. That's a great example. How many times do you have a conversation and something somebody says, well, what Linda said last night, we all kind of stopped and went,
yeah,
what did she say? What was it? What was that? Oh my gosh. We've all forgotten it now. That's our bad. But you know, there's so many times just something like that just stops you in your tracks. And it's like you have to stop and you have to reprocess that. And sometimes it stays with you for days as you're kind of thinking through the complexity of what was said just in a moment, and the simplicity of what was said, and all the ramifications. So that's it can be anything. If we're open to it, it can literally be anything that just stops us. You know?
Try to
Just-
find it. Oh,
A spider's web that you're just about to just wipe away because it's in your garden, and then you stop and you look at the intricacy of that, the symmetry, and it's just like, I remember when Marion when she was working for Home Depot in the garden, she would always be sending pictures back of things that she saw, you know, and all the bugs and the mice and the rats and the birds, and they'd all come and you know, shelter in the garden and hang out, and she'd capture them, and the praying mantis little babies that they would sell to put in the garden. I mean, there's so many things that were just captivating her interest. And she'd take a picture and send it to me, and then I'd be staring at that image. And it can be the smallest thing. That's what life lived that way. Imagine how life transforms if you're moving from amazing thing to amazing thing that everybody else is just walking by. This is what we're trying to get across. But
And I
go ahead.
One definition of spirituality that I heard from, I think it was Deepak Chopra or one of those guys that said, spirituality is simply about living beyond the self. And, you know, if we're just expanding our perspective, I think we're living kind of a spiritual, we're on that contemplative spiritual kind of ballpark, basically.
That totally,
Guys,
totally.
I have to tell you, I'm having a moment right now, this very second, because just before the call tonight, I just learned that my uncle back in Ohio had a heart event, and he was taken to the hospital, and we've been texting back and forth with my cousin, and he was pronounced dead at like 10:50, 9:50 back there. And they just texted me and said he's not dead. He is alive. They said the doctors have not seen anything like this before, and he's not in a comatose state, but he is just normally being sedated, and he's breathing on his own. It's like, I mean, 20 minutes ago he wasn't alive, and now he's alive. It's like, oh my gosh. And my first thought was, he's not supposed to go yet. He's supposed to still be here with us. So, oh my gosh, if that isn't a Thanksgiving blessing, I don't know what is. Anyway, crazy.
Hey, congratulations, Kathy.
I feel like I just birthed a baby. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, he's 82 and he's had some health issues, but he's supposed to still be here, I guess, for a little bit longer. So that's amazing. I'm so happy. Anyway,
Praise God.
yes, absolutely.
Now, the flip side of this is that when we have these encounters, as amazing as they may be in the moment, they don't last. You can't bottle them. It's kind of like the manna that the Israelites got in the wilderness. You know, they would collect it with the dew, and you had to eat it right away because it wouldn't keep overnight. If you put it in a jar, the next morning it was all moldy and horrible. You had to collect it fresh every single day. These moments are the same way. They have to be collected fresh every day, every moment. They don't last. We think that we can have a burning bush moment and that's going to transform our life for the rest of our lives. It's not so. It will fade, and it will no longer carry the same meaning that it did in that moment. So it's like you were saying, how long is your lamp going to stay lit once it's unplugged from the wall? It's the same thing with us. We need to constantly be plugged into the source. Contemplation allows us to plug into the source. When we find ourselves at the end of ourselves and burned out and feeling completely just defeated and distanced, it's because we have allowed our egoic mind to unplug us from the source. And after a while, we can't continue. We might be able to do it for quite a long time, but we're running on battery power, and it is going to fail us at some point. To stay plugged into the source is to stay present to the moment and what the moment actually contains. To be awed and stunned by the slightest of things that we see, because they really are miracles. We think about it. Everything we implant in that. This is what contemplation is all about.
Mhm.
So he writes, the spiritual journey is a constant interplay between moments of awe, followed by a general process of surrender to that moment. We must first allow ourselves to be captured by the goodness, truth, or beauty of something beyond or outside ourselves. Then we universalize from that moment to the goodness, truth, and beauty of the rest of reality, until our realization eventually ricochets back to include ourselves. This is the great inner dialogue we call prayer. Yet we humans resist both the awe and even more the surrender. The ego resists the awe, while the will resists the surrender. But both together are vital and necessary. So do you understand the process that he's talking about here? If we practice presence enough, that we can start to be stunned and awed by even the smallest, or even if we just have an intense moment that breaks through our unprepared egoic minds. That breakthrough is the first step, because it allows us to be captivated, captured by the goodness and truth or beauty of whatever it is that's breaking us through, whether it is the birth of that child, whether it is just a stray line in a conversation, whatever it happens to be. But it hits us at that moment, like the cat in the periphery that causes us to startle. It breaks us out of the normal reverie of things and allows us to see something different. But that's only the beginning of the process, because there has been something that has captured our attention, but are we going to let it in enough and allow it to start changing the meaningful way that we look at life? In other words, he calls it first allowing us to be captured by the goodness of the moment, of something beyond and outside ourselves, then to universalize it from that moment alone, from that specific instance, to the truth and the beauty and the goodness of everything that is around us, the entire creation. And then as we are contemplating that, as that is becoming a reality to us, that we realize that the whole universe, everything God has created and God himself is comprised of that truth, beauty, and goodness. Then can we see how that applies to us? That we also are made of the same truth and beauty and goodness. Now, if it sounds like that's something that's all connected in a single moment, let me assure you that it can often be spread out over a long period of time. You know, it doesn't happen all at once, but it is connected in a process. For instance, I just told you about my experience laughing at the moon, all right? My experience there. That was a breakthrough moment that started that process that he's talking about, in terms of me being able to see that there is this truth and beauty and goodness in the moon, in the moment, in a run, whatever it happened to be. And that created in me a growing sense of God's presence in everything. You know, if I could find it in that one just seemingly everyday occurrence, where else was it? And slowly over time, I got to the point where I was seeing more and more of it, until I was convinced that basically the ground that I was walking on was holy ground, that everything God created is full of that same truth and beauty and goodness. And then there was the moment years later that I know I've told you about, on the back patio in our place in Dana Point, where I had this fuller breakthrough, where I remember not so much hearing the words, but realizing the concept that if God's love is perfect, then God can't love me anymore. And God can't love me any less. And that's when the whole thing got applied to me. Then I realized that all this truth and beauty and goodness was actually focused on me as an individual, that I owned that truth and beauty and goodness to the extent that I wanted to and could accept. And so it was this process from having this concrete specific episodes and a series of those, really, to a point where I could see that I universalized it, that I wasn't thinking in these terms at the time, believe me. But I was realizing that it was everywhere and everywhen, and then have it applied back to me. And that was my moment of real breakthrough. That was 10 years into my journey when I really started to feel like I was loved in this way. And it changed the way then that I viewed myself and viewed relationships and so on and so forth. And it's been growing me up ever since. But it's a process. And it's not necessarily a real quick process. But it does link from the specific and the concrete to something that is more universal, and then it gets applied back. So I agree with his view of this process. Wanted to try to lay that out for you in a way that hopefully it makes sense, and hopefully you can start to see where you are in the process as well. Where are you already at the place where it really does apply to you, that you realize that you are loved in this way, or is there still a lot of that performance-based thinking going on inside you, where you still need to prove yourself? I mean, we all have that to a certain degree. I don't know if that ever completely goes away. It's not gone away in me, it's still there. But it's vestigial at this point. I really operate at least from a 51% mark, where I just believe that I am worthy because I'm here breathing. Because God says so, and for no other reason. But that was a process getting to that point where I not only said I believed it, but it was freeing me up emotionally, allowing me to regulate emotionally. So it's a process. Any comments on that?
I have a question about, sometimes I read some stuff, and even Brother Lawrence says it too, like, whatever it is I do, is it pleasing to God? Isn't that part of what you're saying? Like, you want to please, and so it's earning? What does that
So
mean?
are you saying that sounds to you like more performance-based thinking?
Yes.
That we're trying to please God?
Yeah, to please somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly how it sounds. And maybe that was even how Brother Lawrence conceptualized it. I can't be sure. It was certainly part of the common theology of his time. Catholic theology was all about performance. But then most of Western Christianity is about performance and law. But that wouldn't be the way that I would look at it. I wouldn't phrase it that way myself, but even phrased that way, really what we're talking about here is not so much pleasing God, who has a standard that we have to meet in order to be loved, accepted, redeemed, whatever. And it's more of us becoming the same, not becoming, let me say, it's us finding the same pleasure in what pleases God, so that we are doing literally what pleases us, and understanding that we're pleasing God because our wills have become one and the same. Augustine said in the 5th century, love God and do as you please. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? But once you really are loving God, and that is finding identification with the beloved, remember Thomas Merton's definition there. Once we are so identified with God, as Jesus could say, we and the Father are one, then what pleases us, by definition, is what is pleasing to the Father. And so pleasing God isn't doing something to earn God's favor. It's simply the recognition that we are in the same camp. We are mirroring God's pleasure. Does that help?
I would think so.
Hmm.
And isn't that a start?
Of course it is. Absolutely. So once we are one with the Father, we've talked about this in terms of Sebyana, God's will. But God's will in Aramaic literally means God's pleasure, delight, deepest purpose. So when our will matches God's will, then our pleasure, our delight, our deepest purpose is the same as God's. So we just do what we please, and we are pleasing to God because it's one and the same. What did Jesus pray in Garden of Gethsemane? If there's any way to take this cup away from me, Father, please do it. But, more important than that, not my will, but your will be done. In other words, bring our wills back into unity again, so that what pleases me. Does that help, Ellen?
Yeah, I think I understand now. Like, let's say, like I had a patient today, and so it was a woman who I never met before, the mother, and he says, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do because she was homeless, so for Thanksgiving she's gonna do also go to a homeless shelter to help feed the homeless." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." And I told her about the Isaiah house, which is a block away from my clinic. And so she took down the thing. But I think too, what it means is not a sense of obligations that she's doing it. It is her pleasure to do it. Yeah, it was for her pleasure too. But it coincides with pleasing herself and pleasing God. Yeah, it coincides. It's not out of a sense of obligation.
It's a twofer. You get a twofer.
Yeah.
You get your cake and you eat it too. But that's perfect, Ellen, because if you are doing any of this stuff out of a sense of obligation, then you're paying a tax and you are not pleasing God. And that is so important for us to understand. We're not doing this like trained seals trying to get a fish. That's not what this is about. Until it's internalized, until we become what God is in terms of what pleases us, we are not actually following. And as long as we are just doing something for performance based, we're never really present to it. We're always looking toward the outcome. And we're never really here being awed and stunned by the moments that we're experiencing. Then he says that the ego resists the awe while the will resists the surrender, both together are vitally necessary. Why is that we resist so hard? I mean, it is so freeing. James calls it the law of liberty. It is so freeing to finally not be following something out of obligation and finally just doing what you please and being confident that it is also pleasing at the same time. So why do we resist so hard? Any thoughts on that?
I don't understand the ego resists the all, but you see something awesome. I don't understand the resistance.
Think about the times that you don't see the awe, Ellen. Think of all the times. Why is it so rare that we are awed by moments in our lives when every moment? That's because you are resisting. You are not even seeing it, and you don't even know you're necessarily resisting it. It's the fact that we are blind to it.
Or you don't see it because you're too busy thinking of other things.
And that's the ego at work, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Now, surrender may be a little bit more conscious because nobody wants to surrender. That's the S word, right? No one wants to be vulnerable. No one wants to surrender. No one wants to be on the receiving end. We want to be on the giving end. That's the superior side. That's the side of, and here's the C word, control. And I think that's really what it's all about. We don't want to cede control. As long as we're giving and not receiving, we're in control. As long as we're living within the parameters of what we have chosen to believe and what we can supposedly control, we're feeling more certain. We all crave the certainty as these finite, vulnerable creatures. That's why we resist these things. And we don't even know we're doing it. That's the insidious part. Like Ellen was saying, what do you mean I'm resisting? I love when those things come. I love those moments. But you're not realizing all the moments we're missing because the ego is not allowing us to be present because the ego is trying to retain its own sense of control. That's what the contemplation is breaking through.
Because we're just listening to our own thoughts over and over and over and over again. Instead of
We're watching a movie we've seen 100 times, and we keep watching the same
that
movie.
we directed.
Yeah, there you go. Let's take this
Produced,
metaphor and stretch it out. Perfect.
produced, directed, and everything. Yeah.
We wrote it, we directed it, we starred in it. It's our movie, and we're
Mhm.
gonna hang on to it.
Yep, this is my story.
Got that
I'm
Academy
sticking
Award.
to it.
Dave, is this what you were talking with about me the other day when you said the purpose beneath the purpose? I despise small talk. I can see no awe in small talk. And it's painful to me to come in early 15 minutes before we get down to the meat of the book study. But I'm trying to see the purpose beneath the purpose, which
It
is to
wasn't
see
the purpose beneath the purpose, Ken. It was the task within the task.
that task with task. But isn't it
Okay.
kind of the same thing if I'm having small talk with one of the elderly women here in my apartment complex, and she wants to talk about the weather, right? Which bores me horribly. And even though we have exciting weather here, it's winter, it would be cold. It's spring, it's going to warm up. That's all I need to know. But as I get to know her, I could choose to see the awe in her as a human being. You know what I mean? And I don't. I'm actually, my mind is wandering 1,000 other places than talking about the weather. Is that can you relate those two things, what you're talking about tonight and what you
Absolutely can. I absolutely can. This is where your perceptions of what's important and what's not, your preconceptions of what's important and what's not, is getting in the way of you just experiencing an awesome moment. Your disdain for small talk, which was my disdain for small talk. I remember back when I was in my 20s, a friend of mine, I overheard him saying to somebody else, Dave is just not the kind of guy you can sit and bullshit with, because I wouldn't do it. I always wanted to get to the meat. I wanted to get to the good stuff. And I was missing out on all of these moments where you could just be and connect. There's a scene from the movie City Slickers. You guys remember the movie City Slickers? So it's a bunch of city dudes who go out and they do a cattle drive as a vacation experience for 2 weeks. And so it's a bunch of guys and one woman who is with them on this cattle drive. And there's one scene where they start talking about sports. And she says, I just don't get it. What are you guys? You talk about sports forever. You talk about all the numbers and the this and the that, and I just don't get it. What do you girls talk about? Well, we talk about real life. We talk about relationships. And of course, they're putting their fingers down their throat. And then one of the men says, you know what? When I was a kid, my father and I were so apart, so distant, that we had nothing to talk about. We couldn't connect or relate to anything. But we could talk about baseball. And we could talk about all the silly little line drives and numbers of pitches and ERAs and all this stuff. And that was how we connected. And she got that. That's what small talk can do for us. Yes, if we never rise above small talk, then we're going to have a superficial relationship. But to not realize the place of small talk and how it can absolutely connect us on a level, and it's part of the dance toward intimacy that we do with each other to move through it, that's what we need to be able to see. And that's what I was talking to Ken about, the task within the task. It's not the topic of conversation, no matter how deep or how superficial, that's really important. It's the connection that's happening within that conversation. And when you can see that, then you're living contemplatively. That's
and every relationship starts with small talk, right?
Amen. Amen.
Well, and I'll just add to that too, Ken, you'll laugh at this, but when I was working, we had some managers that were just like the get down to business. The minute they walk into a meeting, they wanted to hit the ground running. And the people were just kind of upset by that. And so we had to coach them to say, you need to walk in on a Monday and just say, how was everybody's weekend? How was that wedding you went to? How's your grandchild doing? Just for 5 minutes. I mean, it was painful for them for 5 minutes, but they had to practice it with gritted teeth to just try to open up softly and be a little personable with people. It was really hard for them, but some were better than others and some didn't make it too well. But
You're talking about me, and I had to be coached by my bosses to do the same thing.
But the truth of the matter is, Ken, if you spend that first 5 minutes having small talk and just letting people be people and connect, you're going to be so much more efficient and productive every moment after that. You know,
Yeah.
I just talked to someone at Shock today who said she gave her 2-week notice because she was getting to the point where she just felt like a number there and not a person anymore.
Hmm.
When we get to that point, then we've lost our relationships and we've lost our productivity, and eventually we lose our connection altogether. Small talk, you know, as meaningless as it may seem on face value, is so vitally important if it allows us to start to share, you know, just about our lives and just connect, and then we can go from there. So I would encourage you to continue to work at the art of small talk. It's part of contemplative seeing.
Mm.
This is all such good stuff, guys. This was a great conversation. I love this, and really good stuff came out of it. So once again, thank you. Any final short comments before we sign off?
I was just thinking that as long as I've been doing this, the private practice bit, like most of my conversations are about these deep, meaningful, personal interactions with clients. And I do feel like I've lost the ability to small talk, like Ken was describing, where like I enjoy the deep connection so much that there's no desire almost for that blah, 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 you know?
Come on, William, we gotta get back to news, weather, and sports, buddy.
I hear you. I don't even watch that stuff anymore, so certainly not the news. So
It really is important. It's important for us to be able to connect at all levels. It's important for us to meet people where they are and not try to pigeonhole into where we think they should be. You know, it's so important for us to do that. Meet them where they are, and then see where the journey can take us together. But to try to force fit someone into what we want to do, that's not connected. And it reinforces our inability to really see the moment and to see what love requires in them. And that's, again, what contemplation is all about. Try to be flexible, all I can say. All right. Well, we are just a little bit over time. So, Scotty, go ahead and give us a closing prayer, would you?
God, thank you for being here with us tonight and letting us explore all these different thoughts, concepts, and ideas, and giving us the brains and intelligence and wisdom to carry on such conversation, whether they start with small talk, whether they're diving into the deep end of the pool right away. We just thank you, Lord God, for the ability to communicate with each other and work with each other and help each other out and express our love for each other as you express your love for us. We lift up Tony and his afflictions, whatever's going on with him, and Beth as well, Lord, and with Kathy's relative, whatever's going on with that person. We just ask for your love, your care, your protection, and your healing upon them. We thank you, Lord, for sharing this time with us and this knowledge with us. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and say our amen. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Amen. And have a
Yeah.
great Thanksgiving tomorrow, everybody. And we'll see you on Sunday.
Okay.
One way or
Bye,
another.
guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, Kathy.
I lost my thing.
Trying to figure out how to sign off here, dear. What's going on there? And Jordana and Linda. Okay. You guys
We'll
be
see you
good.
guys on
And
Sunday.
I'll see
Have
you
a
on
good
Sunday.
Thanksgiving.
And Linda, I'll see you on Saturday. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye, Linda.
Bye, everybody.